Hello and welcome back. Going to take on a new topic today. Killer covers should be fun. As many of you know, I've been doing a lot of top 10s. I did a couple of B-side videos, and there's more of all that coming. But I like to shake it up, do something different, keep things interesting. So I'm going to cover 5 tunes today, and I want everyone to keep in mind, I am not saying these are the 5 greatest covers of all time or anything of the sort. I do think they're all tremendous covers that certainly deserve to be in that conversation, but there are so many things I could have put in this video and probably will put in future videos on this subject. There are 3 factors that I considered when picking songs for this video. Number 1, it needs to be a song that I personally enjoy. Hey, it's my channel after all, right? Number 2, does the cover add something to the original? Does it put a new twist on it that took the song into a whole new direction? And finally, was the cover so well received that it's become almost the definitive version to the point where many people don't even realize that it's not the original version? So all that being said, rock bands look to do a cover, they often look to the distant past and maybe even to an entirely different genre so that they can find a song that might be introduced to a whole new audience. This was not the case with All Along the Watchtower. Hendrix recorded the tune in 1968. It was included on his Electric Ladyland album, and Dylan's original had appeared a mere 6 months before on his John Wesley Harding album. Now, it's true that that album was a bit of a return to Dylan's folk roots, but he had just been through a rock period in the mid-60s, and it's safe to say that a lot of the same people that were listening to Dylan were also into Hendrix. This is clearly a case where the cover outperformed the original, at least in terms of popularity. The Dylan version is really just an album track. Meanwhile, Hendrix had a top 20 single with it, and at one point, his version was placed at number 48 on Rolling Stone's top 500 songs of all time. The Dylan version is pretty much what you would expect: the capoed acoustic guitar, the wailing harmonica, very folky. One might say that it's mellower than the Hendrix version, but the interesting thing is, in some ways it's not. The tempo is actually a little bit quicker, and the drums, we have that insistent snare drum hitting on all the downbeats. So in some ways, it's even got a little bit more urgency to it. The chord progression is simple as can be. 3 chords, this classic minor progression that we hear in so many tunes. He's capoed on the 4th fret, but he plays an A minor shape and a G shape and then an F bar shape. So it's a 1-7-6 progression, which then works its way back up through 7 and to the 1 chord. It's got this endless circularity about it. There must be some kind of way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. There's too much confusion, I can't get no relief. Businessman, they drink my wine. So as I mentioned before, I think most people consider the Hendrix version to be heavier than the original. And I suppose that it is. The drums definitely have more thump to them. You've got the electric guitar. But as I mentioned, the tempo is a bit slower. And interestingly, during the verses, the drum track all but disappears. That section is pretty much carried by Hendrix vocal and the acoustic guitar. Now that acoustic guitar is a 12-string. It's tuned down a half step, and it's played by Dave Mason, believe it or not. Now, the Dylan version was in C sharp minor. Here, Mason and Hendrix are playing as if they were in C sharp minor, but as mentioned, the guitars are tuned down a half step, so it's actually starting on C minor. I love the way Mason plays that first chord, the C minor. Instead of barring it like a normal bar chord, he opens up the first string so that he gets the same E note on the top two strings droning together. This effect is even heightened by the 12-string guitar that he uses. Really cool effect. I think the other two chords are fairly conventional, but there's so much more going on here. Hendrix essentially used the recording studio, I think, to evoke the vague sense of dread that we find in the lyrics. We have percussive elements that pop in and then disappear just as quickly. We've got volume swells, we've got the wah pedal, we've got that atmospheric slide guitar part. We really never know what's coming next. I really like that section of the solo where Hendrix uses the wah pedal. We start off with some octaves a la Wes Montgomery, but on acid. And then mainly some pentatonic stuff in C minor. But he does a cool thing here, which I enjoy a lot. Normally, the second interval is not found in a minor pentatonic. Generally, we go straight from the root to the flatted third. But it sounds really cool to incorporate that two in there.
Child of God, he was walking along the road, and I asked him, tell me, where are you going? Mister told me.
You gotta love that iconic guitar intro there, played by Neil Young. His style of playing is uncopyable. It's so primitive and kind of beautifully sloppy, I think is the best way that I could describe it, that it's really hard to imitate if you're more of a schooled guitar player, but there's so much feeling in it. I love it. Woodstock, of course, was written by the incomparable Joni Mitchell, and this is a really interesting case where the Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young cover actually appeared on vinyl before Joni's version. She had been doing it in live performances as far back as 1969, but the first recording appeared on CSNY's Deja Vu album in March of 1970, and Joni's recorded version did not hit the shelves until April of 1970. Another interesting fact about this one, a third version of the song, recorded by a group called Matthew's Southern Comfort in 1971, went on to become the most popular and best-selling version of the song in the UK. In the US, it was all about the CSNY version in terms of popularity. But these guys topped the charts in Britain with it in 1971. I've heard that version. To be honest, I'm not crazy about it. It's got a very soft, mellow vibe, and I think lacks the energy of the CSNY and Joni versions. It's important to note that Mitchell did not perform at Woodstock, and in fact was not even in attendance at Woodstock. Apparently her manager felt it would be a better career move to appear on the Dick Cavett Show. Now, we have to question that wisdom all these years later. However, I also have to say the Dick Cavett Show was great. If you go back and watch those old clips, I don't know if there's a single interviewer around today with the same intelligence and wit as that guy when it comes to interviewing musicians. But being the genius that she is, Joni took accounts of the festival from then boyfriend Graham Nash, who did perform at Woodstock with CSNY. and news accounts she had watched on TV in her hotel room, and came up with the definitive statement on Woodstock. David Crosby has also said she captured the spirit of the event far better than anyone who was actually there. Well, I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road, and I asked him, "Tell me, where are you going?" This he told me. Said, "I'm going down to Yasgur's farm." That's where the festival was held. Gonna join in a rock and roll band. Gotta get back to the land, set my soul free. And the chorus, "We are stardust, we are golden, we are billion-year-old carbon, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden." Notice a couple of obvious biblical references there. She calls the traveler a child of God. And the final line of the chorus, "We've got to get ourselves back to the garden," clearly referring to the paradise, the Garden of Eden. Similar to what we saw in our previous segment with Dylan and Hendrix, the original Joni version is sparse and folksy, nothing more than Joni's voice and a cool-sounding tremoloed Wurlitzer electric piano. Meanwhile, the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young version is hard-driving rock. We've got bass drums, electric guitar. Stephen Stills plays organ. Graham Nash plays piano. And of course, the killer harmony vocals of CSNY. Also significant, we have a key change. Joni's version starts in E minor. Here we've moved up 1.5 steps to G, and it's a G7 chord, which I think really adds to the sort of tense energy of this version. Finally, I love that dramatic pause, that little half a measure stop just before the chorus on this version. We are stardust, we are golden, we are caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Blinded by the light, wrapped up like a douche, another runner in the night. Blinded by the light, wrapped up like a douche, another runner in the night.
Blinded by the Light was written by Bruce Springsteen and was first released on his debut album Greetings from Asbury Park in 1973. Springsteen had written the tune in response to Columbia Records president Clive Davis, who had listened to the tracks that Bruce had completed up to that point and declared that he didn't hear a single. Those words have been the bane of many an aspiring rock and roller and were later immortalized by Tom Petty in his smash single Into the Great Wide Open.
Their A&R man said, "I don't hear a single."
But neither Springsteen or Davis knew that the song would become a huge hit, all right, but not until it was recorded several years later by Manfred Mann's Earth Band, who included it on their album The Roaring Silence. Manfred Mann took it to number 1 on the US Hot 100 and into the top 10 in several other countries. I think one of the main attractions of this song has always been the sort of rambling stream of consciousness lyrics, which many listeners have had fun trying to decode over the years. Apparently, most of the references are autobiographical. When Springsteen talks about madman drummers, he's referring to his own drummer, Vinny Lopez, who was nicknamed Madman. Springsteen himself was the teenage diplomat referred to in the lyrics. And Indians in the Summer is a reference to his Little League baseball team. The Manfred Mann version can also lay claim to possessing what is perhaps the most misheard rock lyric of all time. Springsteen was a fan of hot rods, and his original line, "cut loose like a deuce," which referred to a Ford Deuce Coupe, was changed to "revved up like a deuce." But somehow in the final mix, deuce ended up sounding remarkably like douche, which I can tell you provided endless hilarity for 11-year-old me and my other 11-year-old friends. But it's in the music that Manfred Mann has made the most significant changes. The Springsteen version is very bright and up-tempo, powered by guitar and sax. It opens with a riff that sounds like nothing so much as Edgar Winter's Free Ride. And the chorus, too, is based on 3 major chords. Blinded by the light. Meanwhile, the Manfred Mann version injects an entirely new progression, making use of a couple of minor chords and a much more moody feel. We've got B flat, A minor, G minor, and down to F. That's a simple 4-3-2-1 in the key of F. The unedited album version is over 7 minutes long, and it really is kind of a studio tour de force. Lots of interesting things going on. We've got some great guitar tones. We've got some great vocal rounds, different vocal parts, weaving in and out and over top of one another. And then you've got that clever little quote from Chopsticks. Apparently that was the idea of drummer Chris Slade, and it fits in really well. Another interesting difference to note between the two versions, Springsteen starts with a verse. Manfred Mann opted to begin with a chorus. That may not seem like a big deal, but I really think that shapes the trajectory of a song in an important way. Some silicone sister with the manager mister told me I got what it takes. She said I'll turn you on, son, into something strong. Play the song with the funky breaks. And go-kart Mozart was checking out the weather chart to see if it was safe outside. You Really Got Me is notable for being the song that essentially launched the careers of 2 iconic rock and roll bands, the Kinks in 1964 and Van Halen 14 years later in 78. The song, of course, was written by Ray Davies, but guitar-playing brother Dave had a lot to do with the final form that it took. According to Ray, it started out as a tribute to the blues and jazz artists that he admired and was written on piano, believe it or not. But as soon as Dave heard it, he decided it would be much better with a guitar-based riff, and that made all the difference. The song was first released in August of 1964 in the UK, did very well there, and was released the following month in the States. And it became the Kinks' breakthrough hit over here, establishing them as one of the top British invasion bands. Now, the reason I say it kicked off Van Halen's career as well, it was the first single from Van Halen's debut album in 1978. Now, later on, Eddie Van Halen admitted he was a bit bummed out that producer Ted Templeman chose a cover to be their first single. Understandably, he would have preferred one of their own tunes, but I think it was a great move that paid off well. For me, listening to these two recordings side by side is a great lesson in the evolution of rock guitar playing and rock guitar tones. Here you've got Dave Davies in 1964 playing through, I believe, a Vox AC30 and wanting a raspier tone that simply wasn't available to him. You couldn't go down to Guitar Center and buy a Boss Metal Zone pedal in those days. So he resorts to taking a razor blade and literally slicing the speaker cone to get that raspy sound. And it worked. He was pushing the boundaries. Fast forward to 1978, and you've got Eddie Van Halen also pushing the boundaries of rock guitar. Most rock guitarists have graduated to Marshall amps now, but Eddie, always the innovator, still not satisfied. So he finds a guy who hot rods his 100-watt Marshall head with a device called a Variac, which makes the tubes run hotter and gives that intense sound that Eddie often described as the Brown sound. I'll never match Eddie's tone, but this is crunchy on a level never seen before. In regards to the playing itself, Davy's guitar solo on the original version was pretty far out for the time. You've got a lot of bends and slightly dissonant double stops. It sounds a bit like Chuck Berry on Speed, but it fits the atmosphere of that recording. Now, I should also take this opportunity to dispel a persistent rumor. For years, many have claimed that Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page actually played this solo. He was quite the studio guitar ace in the mid-60s and did play on many, many recordings, but both he and Davies have consistently denied the rumor. But by the time Van Halen was set to release their debut album in '78, the vocabulary of rock guitar had been expanded tremendously by people like Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, and many others. And Eddie was about to expand it again. He introduced his right-hand tapping technique, which I've talked about before on my channel, which allowed for impossibly fast arpeggios. And I know someone's going to come in the comments and tell me somebody else did it before, and it's true, there were a few guys that did it before, never quite to the extent that Eddie did it. And Eddie also really helped popularize those squealing harmonics, which we sometimes call pinch harmonics. Now, that's another one that other people had done. Billy Gibbons on LaGrange comes to mind. But that insane tone that Eddie had really made them squeal in a way that we'd never heard before. And it's funny, even though Van Halen's version is heavier, the Kinks one almost sounds a bit more frantic in some ways. I think it's a little faster tempo, and something about Davies' vocal delivery, that sort of proto-punk rock delivery. This song really is proto-punk rock, there's no doubt about it. Whereas Roth's vocal, I think, is one of his more understated ones. And finally, one other feature that Van Halen included, that little breakdown after the guitar solo, where everything sort of settles down and we get those little funny oohs and ahs in the background, bassist Michael Anthony and Roth having some fun there. That was kind of a nice touch, and then they come crashing into that next chorus.
Girl, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing.
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real.
When we think of cover songs, I think we generally tend to imagine a younger artist covering an older one, looking to the past, maybe paying homage to one of the greats, or trying to jumpstart a career by reviving an old chestnut. We just saw that with Van Halen and the Kinks. But with his final album, American 4, The Man Comes Around, Johnny Cash turned that whole dynamic over on its head by covering songs from much younger artists. And not only that, but artists in genres that you would not have expected Johnny Cash to cover. Depeche Mode's Personal Jesus, for example. But by far the most impactful song on this record was Johnny's cover of Hurt from Nine Inch Nails. For those of you who aren't familiar, Nine Inch Nails is essentially one guy, Trent Reznor, although he does have a frequent collaborator named Atticus Ross. Reznor's lyrics here are nothing short of breathtaking, some of the darkest and most moving rock lyrics ever put down, I think. There are themes of self-harm right from the opening line, I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. We've got references to heroin addiction, the needle tears a hole, the old familiar sting. Many interpretations have been put forth. Some feel it's meant to be read as a suicide note from the protagonist. Others feel it's about the struggle to find meaning in a harsh and uncaring world. But for me, the overarching theme is the impermanence of human life and really all human endeavor. What have I become? My sweetest friend. Everyone I know goes away in the end. And you could have it all. My empire of dirt. I will let you down. I will make you hurt. Those words, when paired with the incredible music video directed by Mark Romanek, are absolutely devastating. In the video, we get scenes of young, virile Johnny with his wife June, hiking in the woods, riding on a speeding locomotive. But speeding to where? Well, to oblivion eventually. Interspersed with these happy scenes are scenes of old age, death, and decay. Romanek brilliantly includes shots of an old museum/tourist attraction called the House of Cash, now closed and gone derelict. We see a gold record formerly framed and on the wall, shattered on the ground. My empire of dirt. The song was moving enough when sung by a young man like Trent Reznor, but when delivered by Cash, who had just lost his wife, was in extremely frail health and months from his own death, it went to a whole new level. Reznor gave Cash the ultimate compliment when he said, "That song isn't mine anymore." Both versions follow more or less the same chord progression, although Cash's version is in A minor, Reznor does it up a whole step in B minor. For me personally, the Reznor key is much more comfortable. Cash had a really deep voice, and in case you haven't noticed, I do not. There is one significant difference in the chords that I need to mention. Cash begins his version on a traditional A minor chord. Now, as I mentioned, Reznor is in B, but this is a funky chord that he goes for. We've got a B root, we've got F sharp, which is the perfect fifth, and then a little double stop consisting of an octave of B and now F natural, the flatted fifth. So we've got a perfect fifth and a flatted fifth in the same chord here. Now, that sounds pretty twisted. And I'm not surprised that Cash opted for just a traditional minor chord. Knowing his country folk background, those types of dissonances weren't really in his vocabulary, I don't think. The chords in the chorus are played very elegantly. I'm not sure if it's Cash himself playing this. It could be Mike Campbell of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, who I recently found out played on this tune, as did another guitarist named Smokey Hormel, and Benmont Tench, another Heartbreakers alum who played keyboards. But whatever the case, it starts off on a simple one-finger G chord, A minor 7, brilliant. We keep that G note on top. The G is the flatted 7th of the A minor 7th chord. F add G, of course, G still on top. And now a C add G. And off we go again. We've seen this before in songs that I've dissected. That common tone on the top really ties the whole thing together. What have I become? My sweetest friend. Everyone I know goes away in the end, and you could have it all. My empire of dirt, I will let you down. I will make you hurt. That's it for this one, and the usual reminder, you can contribute financially to this channel in any small amount at Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal, links in the description of the video. And if you can't or don't want to contribute financially, that's fine. Just keep watching the videos, maybe share them with anyone who you think might be interested, and leave a comment. That's so important. I think that's the number one thing for getting that algorithm going and getting the video out there to more people. So thanks. We'll see you soon.